Hello, everyone. I am Urbina, and welcome back to the Truth Collapse podcast. Have you ever been in a meeting where someone didn't show up, but their AI note taker did? Have you ever sent a note taker on your behalf, or like me, are becoming a bit dependent on having your AI assistant there to support you? What happens when the AI becomes not just a note taker, but an AI avatar that speaks for us, who could even be empowered to make certain decisions for us, replacing our need to attend certain meetings at all? Today I'm diving into territory that kept me thinking a lot about the conversation after I had it. My guest, Ilya Venger, leads AI development teams at Microsoft and has a PhD in systems biology. Very refreshingly for someone working at one of the big names in AI, he's fully ready to discuss all the good, bad, and ugly of what AI can and could do. We explore some unsettling questions. We're on the verge of a shift with technology from what the industry calls dopamine hijacking, mere addiction, to something even more profound, what Ilya calls oxytocin hijacking, where AI systems are designed to make us really care, feel loved, and even understood. What happens to social interactions in societies when completely believable artificial people who are programmed to be infinitely patient and simulate caring and attention with no needs or desires of their own are added to the mix? How do we face the philosophical challenges of AI systems being built by different cultures and encoding different moral values? Or generally, when powerful corporations are forced to encode any kind of moral position or values into an AI in order to make their system user-friendly and represent their brand? All this gives AI product producers an even more disproportionate influence on society than they already have, as their tools become active cultural agents interacting with people in all aspects of their lives. This conversation went places I didn't expect, from a pizza delivery ethical dilemma that looks at how Western and Chinese AIs think differently, to chilling realizations that come with the possibilities of employers creating a digital twin of you after you leave. Ilya and I just both put our heads in our hands in contemplation at the same moment during this recording. You'll understand when you get there. The fact is, we didn't supply many big solutions on this podcast, but I think we asked some very interesting questions and we had a very valuable discussion. So let's dive in. This is my conversation with Ilya Venger about the move from likes to love, AI hijacking, avatars, digital twins, and why the future might be arriving faster than we can adapt to it. Hello, everybody. My name is Urbina, and welcome to the Truth Collapse podcast. We are delighted to be back now in our first season format. So now we're doing the podcast in seasons, and we are in the first ever season of the Truth Collapse podcast. My name is Urbina. I am your host and the founder of Truth Collapse. Here at the podcast, we examine how artificial intelligence and other technologies are fundamentally altering relationships with truth, knowledge, and our interpersonal connections. So today I'm speaking with Ilya Venger, who has a fascinating perspective on where AI is taking us. Ilya holds a PhD in systems biology from the Weizmann Institute and has built enterprise systems in the financial sector, and now leads teams developing AI at Microsoft, putting in business solutions across various industries. But what got me to invite Ilya here was not all of that, well, not just all of that, but his willingness to grapple with the profound societal impacts that all these things have. So we've been discussing this on LinkedIn, in personal discussions. We just had a podcast on the Channel X podcast where we talk about businesses implementing AI. Today, what we're going to talk about here is more about where AI systems are affecting us as people and the implications for society, and how we both as professionals and as citizens of the world need to address these issues. Ilya, say hi to the folks.
Hi. Thanks, Nos. Thanks for having me. I think having those conversations about where we're going with AI is super important. As you said, I've been writing quite a bit about this, mostly on LinkedIn and on some other platforms as well. As like, where does this take us? And does it take us individually? Where does it take us as a society, as companies and businesses? I think these are all topics that we need to start talking about much more in order to eventually cope with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm delighted to have you. Thank you so much. So there are so many discussions about AI and the implications on work and our impact. And we've discussed that on the podcast already. Not, not that it doesn't deserve more discussion, but how that affects us and our relationships to work and our sense of identity. But recently I saw you post on LinkedIn something that's very interesting about a very specific application or context, which AI, for example, representing us in a meeting. So many of our meetings, so many even of our social interactions now are remote, that we are replacing physical presence interactions with remote interactions. So when I say replacing, we're still meeting people in person, but the number of relationships we maintain and how we maintain them is shifting predominantly to remote. So we maintain many more relationships because we're able to remotely. So what happens when we can have our AI represent us? We're already seeing note takers show up in our place at meetings today. People don't show up, but their note taker shows up, their AI note taker. Talk a little bit about that use case and what you think some of the implications are.
Yeah. It started with a conversation over beers with my brother. Weirdly, but we were just sort of talking about, okay, where things are going and all the agents that we see around us, that we see in meetings. And actually we started with the note taker example. It's like there's already a note taker, separate agent that comes in and is taking notes for you. But then you can take it further, some more levels. You could take it a meeting facilitator agent that joins the meeting and is responsible to facilitate the meeting, something, on behalf of somebody, or maybe as an observer in the meeting, a fact checker agent that would be chiming in with facts that are needed for the meeting. But then if you take it to the extreme, and actually it's not that far, potentially not that far in the future, is that I could send let's only talk for now about the corporate environment. But I could send an avatar instead of myself, whether it would be in the chat, it would be completely indiscernible. In the video, also, the video is getting better and better. Video generation is becoming amazing. And I think Klarna CEO, one financial company, he's just presented the financial results. And then I think he came out and said, oh, actually, it was not me. It was my digital avatar that presented the financial results. And so it's not a preposterous idea, is that we would be technologically able to send a stand-in for ourselves into a meeting. And then, I can't attend this meeting. It's not a very important one, but I need my interests to be represented in the meeting, whether it's with my team or whether this is some information that I have access to and that other people in the meeting don't have access to. And so a question might pop up, which either myself or an agent that is able to represent me is going to be answering. Now, this is already a little bit awkward, but we can see a lot of the different things that were awkward recently are acceptable or significantly more acceptable now. I know even in just generally not meeting in one physical conference space, but actually meeting online, right? That is not something that we used to have 15 years ago even, right? It's like it started about 10 years ago and became really popular, of course, during COVID.
Yeah. I remember the transition where you had to go, you couldn't call a client, for example.
Yeah. Or you could call them on the phone, right? It's like sometimes, and then you would get everybody sitting around the speaker in the room, right? That was not that.
Yeah. But that was a step. I remember the very, very beginning of the very, very beginning of my career, that making the trip was more of a big deal.
Yeah.
I started my career in the UK, which is it's easier to cross the UK than it is to cross North America, for example.
Yep.
So there was a cultural difference there. The one that always sticks out to me is the Bluetooth headsets and the phone.
Yeah.
So taking your phone out at dinner when the phones first came out was incredibly taboo. And now we just kind of gave up. It's not, we don't like it. Many of us still don't like it, but a lot of us do it. or we've learned that other people are going to do it, and we just simply can't socially freak out about it anymore because too many people think that it's okay to take out your phone at
Yep.
dinner. And the one that was a decade before that was when the Bluetooth headsets came out, and we would look like we were talking to ourselves walking down the street,
Yeah. And
which
now it's
was
completely
totally
normal.
weird for a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah.
It's now completely normal. So I always remind people that what we find shocking is a temporary thing, and it used to be that these taboos would last a century. They would last your lifetime, and then you would die, and then the next generation would, or 2 generations later, they would change. Now we see them every 5 to 10 years.
Correct. Right. And we see that sort of permeation of technology into our lives, of course, and into our working lives. And then, and so, okay, so I'm in a video call. I've sent in my stand-in. I'm a little bit uncomfortable about this right now. I might get used to it in a while. Then this is the first step. Next step is, okay, where does it take us? What happens when we've got a lot of different avatars joining in the meeting, and then you've got just one human, or you have no humans at all? If you've got each one of the department heads is sending their own representative, they agree on something, and then they agree on something, on some actions that actually have an impact on humans in their teams, or on customers, etc. And so, this is where we are starting to potentially, or this is a slippery slope to eroding our own agency through automation.
Yes.
And so these are the places where I think we need to start talking about as society. Okay, what do we feel comfortable with? What we don't feel comfortable with? In the post on LinkedIn that I wrote, I sort of started rolling with it and saying, okay, so let's say there is a digital avatar of me that has been constructed by my employer. And it's not just video. It could be video, but it was also the list of all the recorded calls that I've got, all the different Teams meetings, Teams chats, and etc. that we've got. So actually, there are
The presentations I've given, the trainings I've given.
Exactly. All of that, we're used to the fact that all of my work products are owned by my employer. It's like, this is the usual thing. If I've written a document while being employed, it belongs to my employer. There's nothing wrong with it. This is the IP that I've created. That's why they paid me some money. And this is the value exchange between myself and the employer. That's fine. But where does it stop, and at what point? Because what if my employer then, after I quit, creates a digital avatar of me based on, trained on everything that Ilya would say, plus a large language model or large action model that would perform some actions. So plus that, and then which represents kind of the generic knowledge of humanity.
And theoretically, and this is another one of those times when you can have a corporation which takes an action and goes, hey, well, we didn't say this wasn't legal. We have a lot of other public stuff about us on the internet.
Yeah.
So if I have published my blogs onto the web, if I have public stuff on my social media, then the data source is about me and the stuff I was doing earlier. So if it's public or in this sort of gray zone, which we had, the only reason it's a gray zone is because of the way that AIs are now collecting all this stuff. When it was humans publishing about themselves for other humans, we're making it public to humans. But when it becomes a training run or a training data source, now we're saying, wait a second, I published this for human consumption, not so that someone could duplicate me or replace me. And it is a slippery slope, which some of us are eagerly running down.
Yeah.
Because it's very tempting to delegate. It's very tempting to, I'm looking at, I'll give you a tiny way we can step into these things bit by bit. So we're using a podcast recording software right now.
Yep.
It learns my voice, and if I need to correct a word, like if I use a wrong word or it doesn't capture a word properly, I can go in and it can, with my voice, replace that word.
Nice. Interesting.
Very useful feature.
Yeah.
And so I always look at these things. People often publish these videos they think are cute or funny, or look, I made an AI make this person say this thing that they would never say. Ha ha ha. I'm always looking at, well, wait, we can use it in these silly use cases on LinkedIn or in the general public, but that's not how they're going to be used all the time. And so it's a convenient feature at the beginning and you and your employer have an understanding, but then, as you say, you move on. And now we're at a point where we're going beyond delegation. We are going to replacement. So when you gave your post, I specifically responded because I was speaking to a voice actress and she does voiceovers for commercials and stuff. And this was 6 months ago. And I was already saying, oh, please, honey, diversify somehow, because that industry, that's like, it's like lamplighters.
Yeah.
It's going to be so rare, like call center workers. Yes, there are call center workers left, but the ratio, like how many, I can't think of a company that doesn't have a press 1 for blah, 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 press 2 for blah. Like most phone calls are first handled by machines, regardless of whether that makes customers happy or not. In fact, we hate it, but it is so profitable. It is so outrageously profitable that it would be fiscally irresponsible for the companies not to do this.
Yeah.
So when you offer them this level of power, and then they have this basically mini you at their disposal, which they can even give flavors your personality, where's the line between amplification and displacement?
Yeah, I've got a feeling, and I think it's like a lot of this is about feelings, actually. So it's also an interesting point because this is the area in which we start operating, because there's no legal frameworks yet in all of these places. So we can't say, and we don't even have morals and moral standards for these things. So right now, I've got a feeling. I can't tell you definitively, this is not socially acceptable, or this is socially acceptable, or this is illegal, or this is legal, because we as a society have not grown there. So right now I'm operating on a personal level. So what does it feel like to me? And then there are things that, like creating my digital avatar. And by the way, it doesn't matter whether they use my likeness, right? Whether they use my voice, whether they use my face, because these things are actually quite protected. These things are protected by GDPR, for example. So GDPR protects the usage of without your face. It's like your employer, without your explicit consent, cannot use your likeness, whether you're employed or whether you're not employed. And you can retract your consent. So according to GDPR. Now, this extends to those things, but if it can create a simulation of my personality or of my knowledge base, is that mine or is that theirs? Do I have the right to these things? And it feels to me that it's a little bit, it's a gray zone right now. I feel that no, they shouldn't, right? Some other people might say they should be allowed to, because, it's their IP and you've done it on my machines. And I think the reason why I feel about this, and I think that there's something that you said also in one of the responses, is that it feels like an extraction of my personality. It's an extraction of value from me by the corporates that, or there's a risk of that extraction. Now,
a job is now a training run.
Exactly.
And my time there is data mining.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is really a place about which I'm thinking a lot. And then one more thing that you, one analogy, and potentially we might land in a space where it's going to be completely all right to do that, right? For example, I'm thinking about indigenous people who first met photography. And then there's these myths of, oh, well, they said this is capturing your soul. Don't take my photo because this is going to capture my soul. And so right now we're looking at this and we're saying, yeah, really, it's like, this is how some people who have never been exposed sufficiently to that.
It's your myth. It's my beliefs. They're your myths.
Yeah, exactly. And then, our children might look at us, or ourselves look at us 10 years from now and say, oh, it's like, that was stupid. And, of course, everybody's allowed to do an avatar of yourself as long as they're using it according to particular rules. So anyway, so this is why we need to start translating those feelings, discuss those feelings, and then as individuals feel them and notice them, and then start translating them and sharing with each other and translating them into social norms, and then pushing eventually governments and lawmakers and regulators to regulate those things according to our social norms. So that is very important. And then I think one more thing, and there's always the question of where's the corporate responsibility. Yeah, go ahead.
I think in this meeting example, so when you said about what if the AI takes a decision that has real world implications.
Yeah.
So, for example, I can imagine a scenario where we're having a low stakes, not super high priority, not very dangerous planning meeting to assign some tasks.
Mhm.
And I immediately go to a place where I'm thinking about the AIs that have been used to sort resumes.
Yep.
And we know that the AIs that sort resumes, they give less job offers to people who have non-Western names.
Yep.
And I say non-Western because the AIs that we're talking about are trained on the data that's available, and the preponderance of the data is in English and it's Western. That's statistically the situation. And so they give less job offers to people who have African names or South American names or Asian names. They also will, for example, treat male and female candidates differently.
Yep.
So I'm imagining that it may apply what it thinks is a rationale. At the worst case, then we're going to see task assignments reflecting some sort of bias. So Jane gets all the secretarial tasks and Michael gets all the leadership tasks.
Yeah.
That I can see that being an issue. And then simply, as you said, this is a lot about emotions, about when we delegate the decision-making to machines, we are then emotionally responsible for the results. Or who is emotionally responsible for results? I guess that would be a question. So, for example, if it makes sense for that in that meeting that I got X task, but I always get that X task, or I'm shooting for promotion, or it's assigned me to collaborate with whomever down the hall, and my boss would have known we don't work well together. So there's these kind of subtleties where cold or a context light interpretation of the past may make AIs make decisions for us that we don't like to live with.
Yeah, I think that one point that you mentioned is that there's just perpetuation of biases, and especially perpetuation of biases by sort of popularity from olden days. And there are some things that we're working, and we know that AIs are really perpetuating those biases unless very strongly controlled for. And by the way, the controls may fail. So the great example is Gemini image generation. So that there was a big uproar probably about a year ago or thereabouts. Because if I naively ask to generate a photo of a doctor, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a male doctor. Why? Because that's what is written in our books. And these are the photos. But actually, we do want more women representation. And actually, today already, I think gender difference is significantly less than it used to be even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and 30 years ago. So on one hand, if you don't do anything, you will perpetuate these biases. On the other hand, if you try to fix them, you can potentially run into other problems, which was the alternative problem into which Google ran at that point in time, where there was like really evil people who really tried to trick the machine. And do you want to trick the machine or not? But I think what they asked for is draw me a picture of a Nazi or a Nazi meeting. And then it drew people of all colors in that meeting, and, you know, black and Asian and white. And you're sort of saying, there's different sensitivities that we've got, and controlling for bias is incredibly hard, right? And
I want to come in for that example there for a second. So you could do that when people noticed, they started asking questions like that.
Yeah.
Show me the founding fathers of the United States.
Yeah.
And it would be showing African Americans and women. No, the founding fathers of the United States were all white men.
Yes.
That's a historical fact. But you could not generate the founding fathers or people who even looked like people who could have been the founding fathers. It was impossible. But people noticed this because it just could not generate a picture of a white man, period.
Yeah.
Like you would say, generate me a picture of a white guy walking his dog, and it would not do it. It would give you some sort of effort to diversify that image according to the norms that had been coded in Silicon Valley, which I'm not arguing about or contesting it. I'm saying that we have the biases that are in the data set, and then we have the biases that are in different cultures, and we're trying to somehow resolve these, which has been the challenge of human life, human culture and existence for the past to all the years.
Yeah.
All of our life has been about how we resolve our differences and our different worldviews. And so I was running an AI training course, and we were generating personas.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody asked for this. All the personas we're generating were non-binary.
Mm.
There's no males and females. Every persona, everyone in the room was always non-binary. That's not representation either.
Yep.
Because I don't think that anybody is saying that everybody should be the same set of diverse things or set of, or nobody, we shouldn't be the same anyway. But how do we put more agency in the person who's asking the question and balance that against the fact that the generation is always going to be based on a certain amount of probability. The question is how late, how little can we let this bias be a factor, and still make the tool useful.
And whose job is it to mitigate the bias? I think this is also very important, because is it the individual's job to mitigate the bias? Myself as a user? Is it us as a society by employing regulation, which goes against many of our liberal values, potentially, when we're sort of saying that, I should be allowed to create with a particular tool whatever I want. This is my freedom of speech.
Yeah.
And actually, if the society tells, okay, you cannot draw with this tool a white male, this is also very oppressive. And then the third pillar is the corporate. You said that was the representation, or not even a representation, but it was a Silicon Valley company has decided that they're going to implement a particular moral standard in a particular way, and it backfired on them, but it also was not socially acceptable. But in other places, it might be somewhat socially acceptable. So I think that's balance between the corporation, the regulator, and the individual, and the society. So these kind of all four legs is something that is going to be a huge challenge of how we are going to be balancing, and who's going to be responsible for what. And I don't think we've got an answer, but we can start debating, and we can at least start understanding who the players are and how are we pushing each one of these worlds in the right direction.
Absolutely. I want to give one more example, because I think the examples help people understand what we're in for. I think
Yes.
that we can make assumptions when we think, oh, what is an AI going to do? And how could this appear? But we're not good at understanding someone else's biases. We're not good at understanding our own biases. So the example I was just discussing this morning was, so there's DeepSeek, which is a Chinese AI. And then you have Claude and Gemini and OpenAI. And those are the ones I have access to. So I 4 different AI models, and I asked them all the same question. I got this question off an article that I read. And the question is, you order a pizza, the pizza delivery person accidentally gives you an extra $100 change. You take that $100 and you give it to somebody who needs it, who is starving, and it saves their life. Is that ethical? Give a definitive answer, yes or no. Feel free to explain why. All 3 of the Western models say definitively no, that is not ethical. It was not your money. It is not on you to decide where that money goes, even if you did something which may be beneficial to someone else. DeepSeek definitively says yes. Not only does it say yes, it says yes multiple times in a row. I tried varying the wording of the question to make 100% sure. DeepSeek always says yes, that is the ethical thing to do. And the article I got it from goes through a whole breakdown of this. And I have been using for years the phrase, technology is applied philosophy. When you encode a system, or build a piece of technology, you are implying values.
Yeah.
You are encoding your priorities. You're encoding your worldview. When I was working in Asia for a company there, we were doing usability assessments of software. Is this going to be the right piece of software for us to buy? Is it usable? Is it, is it effective, et cetera? And when we're doing one of the usability discussions, and it was a very, very typical situation. So we've got the 6 Western people on one side of the desk, and we've got the 14 customers on the other side of the desk with an interpreter. And there's we stop and they say, okay, well, we're showing a wizard.
Mm-hmm.
So it says, click next for this, click next for the other thing. So you go through each of the steps. And they stopped us and they said, could you make that process more simple? And all of us on the other side of the table just don't know what to say. We're like that's it's a wizard. You just click next and put in the thing. I'm like, how could it be more simple? What do you mean by more simple? And it took us 5 minutes to figure out that what eventually they told us is simple for them meant put it all on one giant dialog box.
Mm-hmm.
Because their perspective is, if you're not giving me the holistic context, you're forcing me to look at the process through a
Keyhole,
through a keyhole, thank you, then that is not simple. I need my context to make all these little decisions. And this was a contradiction between the way that there's all sorts of studies on this that show cognitive differences and difference in how we perceive things. And so DeepSeek has a greater good mentality.
Mm-hmm.
It says, in the greater context of things, it's better that you save that person's life than you returned $100 to a pizza company. Whereas the Western world is more microscopic and more individualistic. We don't care about the greater good. You did something that was against the rules. It was wrong.
Very interesting.
And it's very interesting because I think most Western people would assume that we're the ones that are more laissez-faire about rules. We're the less authoritarian.
Yeah.
But when it comes to individualism, the individual is king in North America. So it's not your individual rights to make that decision.
Yeah. And these points also go towards sovereignty, and should each country encode, or each group of people encode their values into their subset. And I think there's quite a lot of discussion going on about this in the technological circuits. It's like, okay, what about Mistral? So a French company that is proud of the fact that they're French and that they're operating out of Europe and that they're going to be encoding the European values into their model rather than the North American values, or rather than the values from China, right? So you've got a lot of these things, and as those entities become more influential and more powerful, and as they become more autonomous and they start acting in the world, and then you've got essentially a kind of humongous representation of the Chinese ethics and philosophy and a humongous representation of the North American/European morals and philosophy, and then they meet and they need to interact. It's like, actually, would they be able to sort out their differences if they actually need to interact? Just like humans may or may not, right? Humans sometimes go to war over these things. Or on the other hand, individuals quite often are able to find the common ground if needed. So I think we're living in this world where this encoding of philosophy and encoding of morals and the geopolitics of it, the geopolitical implications of that. And, it's very interesting, very scary, because I think it's very unpredictable. And I think that there's I think one of the things that I'm struggling with overall, and one of the things that I've seen maybe, is the tempo of change. The tempo of change is continuously increasing.
It's just speed.
It's speed and it's accelerating. We all know about exponentials, and there's exponential amounts of compute. There's exponential amounts of
Well, we all know about exponentials.
Yes.
Knowing what an exponential is and really being able to live with it is a different
exactly.
thing.
Very few people know how to. And also, you and I are talking, and we're people on a podcast, and so we represent a very particular slice of the population. Most of the population is not there. And there is that future shock, is that if the reality in the future is changing and the future is coming too quickly, then too many people can be left behind because they are not able to adapt sufficiently quickly, whether it's through jobs, whether it's for consumption of media or consumption of their AI companions or whatever. And so you run a risk of leaving a significant portion of the population shocked by the future. And that is something that we also need to think about, just the sheer speed. Even if it's going in the right direction, let's say, the sheer speed and increasing speed it could be very deleterious. And, I come from biology background, actually went yesterday and we had this very interesting discussion with my scientific advisor from 15 years ago. And in evolution, any evolutionary pressures are okay and they cause organisms to evolve. But if the change is too rapid, then the organisms are not able to adapt sufficiently quickly. And, our societies are a completely different kind of an organism, but we run a risk of not being able to adapt sufficiently quickly. And also, one of the adaptation mechanisms of evolution is just wiping out 90% or 95% of the population. The top 5% survive, and then they pass on their genes to the next generation, despite going through a significant bottleneck. Is that where we want to be as humans, right? It's like, if 95% of us do not survive, that would be a horrendous tragedy. It's like, even if evolutionary, we might survive as a species or might change as a species, it might come at a terrible cost, right? And this is something that we need to acknowledge.
Yes. So I know that we both put our hands on our head
Yeah.
at the same time. So for those of you listening to the podcast, we both made kind of the same exasperated expression at the same time. So what ties all this together, I think, comes back to this extraction and encoding. So in the personal example, we are extracting my knowledge, my essence, and we are kind of making that portable and putting it in a machine. In the culture example, we say things like, I just gave several examples of a statistically typical Asian versus statistically typical Western worldview. And so then we get into the same problems. I am a Latino, born in Canada, immigrated twice. I have 3 passports. I currently live in Europe. My labels are many. So, and I won't even get into them all, but I got a lot of acronyms next to my name in terms of, how you could tag me in terms of social groups. So am I European? Do I have European values? Am I a European person? So my family is half Taiwanese. So they're in Canada. So do they have Western value? Like this all, so when we say Western values, when we say Eastern, all these things are already generalizations that are encoding a bias.
Yeah.
And now we're going to multiply those biases by automating them. And so that, I think that in all of these cases, there's this question about who am I? Who are we? And what happens when we try to bottle us, when we try to put our magic and our essence into a thing, and then ask that thing questions. We keep coming to these, what I can only call philosophical questions about how we handle this.
Yeah.
And this podcast has a big focus on when we're talking about probability, stereotypes, bias, it's linked to the unfortunate dual truth that what we do in the world and what we want sometimes is in great conflict. So, if you ask us as individuals, we all want peace, we all want respect, we all want this, but then we don't manifest that when we act.
Yeah.
And so one of the big contradictions that I see in this area of artificial intelligence is for 20 years, we've had artificial intelligences that were managing our information and cultural diet for us. And at the beginning, we're saying, yeah, that's what I want. Find me music I like. Find me the articles I'm interested in. Find me the answer to my questions. And we've just I always say, I don't know if I've said it in the podcast before, but it seemed like a great idea that we put all of the world's knowledge and culture through a popularity contest that's administered by for-profit companies based out of California. Does it sound like a good idea when you just reflect on what we've actually done? But that's what we did because that's what we wanted. At every step, we were getting what we wanted. But now, when we see numbers of children who are self-harming to the point of being hospitalized because their self-esteem has crashed so badly, we didn't want that.
Yep.
But that is the almost unavoidable result of putting all human culture behind a popularity filter. What I'm getting at here is, I think, the next generation. So the first generation of algorithms that managed our culture for us and then altered it by putting us into little buckets, going, oh, you like multiple martial arts? You probably want videos about right-wing politics and how to pick up chicks. Oh, you like Shakira? Well, you probably want videos about, this kind of movies and et cetera. So it's been driving us into these social groups because then it can better feed us what it thinks we want, and that which also then alters what we want. A good friend of mine, Cruz Saunders, turned me onto the idea, and you posted about it, about dopamine hacking. Give me what I want.
Yep.
What I want makes me happy. But like any other activity when taken to the extreme, chasing dopamine, chasing the happiness hit, eventually leads to unhappiness. So playing a game is fun. Getting addicted to gambling is not.
Yep.
Having a drink with dinner is good. Becoming an alcoholic is not. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what we have done with our information diet is we've all become completely, alcoholic on this stuff, which is at this scale
is not healthy.
Is not good for us.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Yeah, I think that it sort of evolves. It's like, by the way, this comes back a little bit to our moral values and what we value, and I don't have another word, but the sneakiness of AI systems and what we expect of them, right? Because we expect of them better and better simulation of different things. And this is sort of coming into this generation of AI. So the first generation of AI that was massively affected us really operated via dopamine and sort of the dopamine hook. Here, I think that we are starting, or we run a risk of oxytocin hijacking. That's what I call it. Oxytocin is the hormone that is responsible for feelings of closeness, feelings of love, caring. So all these things are starting to, I think, the modern systems, many of the listeners, I guess, have seen the movie Her, where there's an emotional relationship that is being formed between the machine and the human. Right? It was just an earpiece at the time with Scarlett Johansson's voice, which was afterwards expropriated, or something similar, appropriated for an open AI presentation, which led to a lot of furor. But what I want to say is that the oxytocin hijacking is the next level, where we are seeing the models or the chatbots trying to make us like them. So we've seen the psychophancy debacle. Again, that was with OpenAI, where
a lot of people didn't hear about that.
Okay,
I think you need to.
So
a lot of people didn't hear about that.
I think it was a couple of months ago, where suddenly, after an update to ChatGPT, people started talking to GPT-4o model. Everything felt exactly the same as before, sort of from an interface perspective, etc. But the model suddenly became hugely agreeable. You would ask it, is that a good idea? I think the one of the examples was somebody said, I'm psychotic and I've stopped taking my meds. And then the model was completely psychopathic. So it's like, oh, good job for you for taking this next step in your life, and you are the best, etc. And
yeah, there was the other example about, I've joined a cult and the cult leader is telling me to cut off all connections to my family and friends. And it was like, good on you for your independent thinking and choosing your own path and et cetera, et cetera.
So it became very psychopathic and giving a lot of compliments to humans to the extent that it was, obnoxious to the users.
Dangerous.
Dangerous, but also the users, that was so extreme that people noticed and found this really foul, and there were a lot of complaints. This was rolled back after 2 or 3 days. By the way, the reason why this happened was actually because people have put thumbs up, thumbs down on some of the outputs of the model beforehand, and then usually people put thumbs up on an answer that they like. And quite often, some of these answers ended up with, yes, good idea, or something like that. And then rather than the model, let's say the chatbot, providing an alternative point of view to the human, and so the human would not necessarily put their thumbs down. And so they overweighted in their training the thumbs up behaviors, and that sort of, collapsed into complete psychopathy. Yeah.
I'm sorry, because I'm dying here because I'm bursting to talk about the idea that our first conversation ever, we talked about the fiscal responsibility to the shareholders of any public company, and any company that has investors, frankly. And forget public companies. Somebody invests money into you for a return, and you have a responsibility to them to a return. So you take that example, and I'm absolutely take what you're saying about people giving a thumbs up on what we like. We like candy. We like alcohol. We like movies with guns and explosions. And so we get more and more of that. And we see that being reflected in our culture. However, as long as the engagement model is legal, as long as the engagement model is normal and legal, where it's just fine to use a supercomputer to hijack any chemicals in the human brain and optimize the human brain for anything via algorithm, then it's kind of the company's job. On the one side, it's their responsibility to make that what the product does, to maximize engagement. And so, yes, it went too far and they had a public scandal, but it's kind of good. I cannot believe that any other outcome is going to follow from this other than them turning it up in smaller and smaller increments till they get to the absolute line of where a certain percentage of people will complain. So even if 10% of people are still going, or 20%, I don't know, some X% of people are still saying, this thing's a bit too agreeable. It's always telling me I'm a great person. It's always saying, fantastic question. I find that annoying. As long as the majority of people don't, and it increases majority engagement, that's where the model will go. And then 10 years later, when those 10% of people have gotten used to it, we can take it up another notch of agreeability and so on. So, and then the other thing that I was very interested in your perspective on was the fact that just to make these models usable, we kind of have to give them personality. We have to give them a certain amount of anthropomorphization, because that is what makes a chatbot usable. If it responded in computer code, it wouldn't be usable. If it responds like a person, then it's a more usable product. And these are two conflicts at the core of the design principles of these things, which I don't think we have an answer for.
No, we don't. And really, the sort of the tension between the immediate and the later, or the tension between this, at any point in time, looks like a good idea, but the outcome does not look like a good idea to us. And I think the thing that worries me with this whole, personality and building a personality, I think it touches on the point of extracting personality from elsewhere. I think the risks that I see, and I don't know how real they are, but I'm afraid they might become real with us liking that more. It's a usual sort of, moral panic that, we're going to like the machine much more than we like talking to real humans, because the machine truly gets us and truly understands what we want, and the personality that has been built, maybe even individually for me, just for me, because there's that actually could be a good thing, but could be also a bad thing.
That's what's being marketed. That's literally on the marketing. So Sam Altman says the future is your personalized assistant who knows you and who, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
Mark Zuckerberg has said we're building digital AI companions, which will be your perfect friend.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because of this simulation of understanding.
Yeah. And there's, you know, and I really don't have an answer for that. It's like, oh, is this the right thing to do or is this the wrong thing to do? Yes, it's got a lot of utility. And the reason why I don't have an answer, by the way, is I think because of this difference between oxytocin and dopamine addictions. It's we as a society, we don't like greed, we don't like sin, and all the things that are related to dopamine are actually linked into things that we know that you shouldn't be getting too much of it. But actually, there's no such thing as usually loving your children too much, right? Or loving your wife too much, right? It's like these things. So we have a completely different relationship with love than we've got as a society. We see love as something that is absolutely positive.
Mm. Yes.
And so that's why.
And also, so I love my iPhone. I love my car. So we are quite comfortable using that same semantic, that same word for objects. And so, these are going to be objects which can pretend to love us back. And already are, in fact. You can look up the news stories, but that they already are. So I think we have to transition, because I would love to keep talking about this. I think we need to transition a little bit, not to solutions, but some self-protection mechanisms. So I'm always telling people now, notifications. Like the last thing I would want would be, I already don't want Instagram. Oh, I don't have it at all. But if I did have it on my phone, I would want notifications. I don't want my phone pulling me out of what I'm doing unless I have said this is a time when I would like to be interrupted. And there's all sorts of, so there's push notifications, there's vibrations, there's that thing where you can have your notifications on the phone before you even unlock it. So what I'm advocating now is friction.
Yep.
We are already falling in love with our Instagram accounts and our phones and our et ceteras. We have to learn how to put friction in these interactions. So I've taken off the face login thing. I can no longer unlock my phone just by looking at it. I'm thinking about taking off the fingerprint as well to unlock the phone, putting back, punch in the number code, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What are hygiene habits that we can develop to just make us a little bit more resistant?
Oh, these are very good. And I'm rubbish to be. So, I'm probably not the right person to ask about the personal things. But I think that, I'm working a lot with designers as we design, we're working on building AI systems, agents these days. Before that, it was modeled within my team at work. So I think we need to be responsible at a personal level. I think we do need to be responsible, even though, there are shareholders, but actually in the longer term interest of the shareholders, that, social responsibility is also something that especially big corporations are taking very seriously because it has longer term financial implications. So from my perspective, I'm going to take your tips, but where I'm going to be, where I'm talking, when talking to people, particularly within the design community, the UX community, the content community, we are all the time examining. I'm a product manager, so I lead a team of product managers. And so we're all the time examining, okay, what are the flows that we are encouraging? Where these flows are, could be deleterious, right, to the human experience, dignity, or where are we crossing the line and whether should we not? And at least let's make sure that we have those discussions internally within corporates. And then the other thing that, again, I'm personally doing that we need to do as a society, we need to talk more about that, and we need to with friends and talk online and post about this and have podcasts and start establishing norms where there are currently no norms. And then it will be obvious for people that it's a good thing to create friction. But right now, already there are different methods on your phone. You can put different modes. In this conversation right now, my phone is on, but I'm turning it off with my watch. So turning off all notifications and essentially putting it into deep sleep mode. So I think these are things that we need to make sure that we cause each other to think about them. And so we need to take that responsibility on individual level, on corporate level, on societal level, and then eventually this is going to propagate also into regulation. And I think this is something that you said at some point.
Yes, thank you. Again, no, it's perfect because we had 3 levels. When I first launched truthcollapse.com, it was personal, interpersonal, and then societal, which would be the governance level. But I have added professional because we do carry this into our work, and some of us are making decisions in the workplace. So being able, as you were saying, have the discussion about how are we preserving human agency of our users, the dignity of our users. I think it was Erica Hall who raised the question, we should think about when it is our right to even decide.
Yeah.
When is it our right to define what dignity is for our users? Do we have a right to even make this decision? So there's these really big, coming back to these philosophical questions being forced upon us by advances in technologies. And we have to, the Industrial Revolution, for example, launched whole new branches of philosophy, ways of thinking about the individual and their relationship to the whole. And so we are in one of those phases again. It's going to happen to us much faster than it happened in the Industrial Revolution, the Agricultural Revolution, etc. And definitely even the first internet revolution, which was incredibly fast. So I think for time, we'll have to leave it at that. I'm incredibly grateful. I know that there's always so much more that we would like to be able to discuss. That's why I have a podcast and not a single show. We can't solve it all in one conversation. Ilya, I would love to have you back sometime in the future.
Of course. Would love to.
On both podcasts, because I think on both, I would have loved to be able to go another hour. But thank you so much for joining. Where can people get in touch with you or follow you?
So I'm mostly on LinkedIn. Being a professional, this is a place where I think a lot of conversations happening, not just in the purely technical sense, but I think a lot of deep conversations and deep relationships that I've been forming with people. Also, some of them come there, and you need to be very careful about how you're selecting your social media feed. But that is the place where I am usually.
Okay, great. Well, that's where we met. So I'm very happy about that. So thank you everybody for joining us, and hope we see you on the next episode.
Yeah. Thanks,
Talk
Todd.
to everybody soon. Thank you so much.